Sarah Chun looked through the window of the space station and tried to keep her face serious. Outside, the biggest spaceships she had ever seen were floating in perfect rows. They were dark gray and covered with spikes and scary-looking weapons. Red lights blinked all over them like angry eyes. The ships had arrived 3 days ago without warning. First came the small ones, then the medium ones, and finally the huge ones that were so big they blocked out the sun. People on Earth could see them even during the day. The news said there were over 1,000 ships total. Sarah was Earth's top diplomat, which meant it was her job to talk to aliens if they ever showed up. She had studied for this her whole life, reading about different ways aliens might act and what humans should do. But none of her books had prepared her for what was happening now. The leader of the alien ships had sent a message. He wanted to meet with Earth's representatives on his flagship. The message was very formal and used lots of big words. It said things like surrender and submit to the glory of the Empire, and your pathetic world will kneel. It sounded like something from a bad movie. Sarah was now walking through the hallways of the alien ship with 5 other humans. There was Colonel Rodriguez from the military, Dr. Peterson, who studied aliens, and 3 other diplomats. The aliens had sent small ships to pick them up and bring them here. The alien ship was huge inside. The walls were black metal with red lines of light running through them. Everything was sharp and pointed. Even the door handles looked like weapons. Tall alien soldiers stood at attention every few feet. They wore black armor and held energy rifles. The soldiers were definitely trying to look scary. They were about 7 feet tall, with pale blue skin and 4 arms each. Their faces were long and thin with big yellow eyes. When the humans walked by, the soldiers would growl low in their throats. Colonel Rodriguez whispered to Sarah, "They're really going all out with the intimidation factor, aren't they?" Sarah nodded. It reminded her of a haunted house at Halloween, where actors tried way too hard to be frightening. She bit her lip to keep from smiling. Finally, they reached the main chamber. The doors opened with a loud whoosh, and dramatic music started playing from hidden speakers. The room was enormous, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Red spotlights shone down on them, while the rest of the room stayed dark at the far end of the chamber. Sitting on a throne that was at least 20 feet tall was the alien commander. He was bigger than the soldiers, maybe 9 feet tall, and his blue skin was darker. He wore a cape that seemed to be made of metal and a crown with sharp points. His 4 arms were spread wide to show off his size. Hundreds of other aliens stood in rows on both sides of the chamber. They all looked serious and dangerous. Some held weapons, others held banners with scary symbols on them. The whole scene was designed to make visitors feel small and helpless. The commander's voice boomed through the chamber. "I am Admiral Zephyrian of the Galactic Empire. You stand before the might of 10,000 worlds." He paused, clearly expecting the humans to be impressed or scared. Instead, Dr. Peterson leaned over to Sarah and whispered, "Is he compensating for something? That throne is ridiculously big." Sarah pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Admiral Zephyrian continued, "Your species will now learn the glory of serving the Empire. You will bow before our power and accept your place as our servants." He gestured with all 4 arms, and the music got louder. Lights flashed in patterns meant to be hypnotic. More soldiers marched in carrying banners and weapons. It was like a very expensive show, but to Sarah, it just looked silly. The Admiral was trying so hard to be intimidating that he seemed like a child playing dress-up. The dramatic music sounded like something from a superhero movie. The light show was flashy but pointless. Colonel Rodriguez was having the same problem. His shoulders were starting to shake with suppressed laughter. Admiral Zephyrian noticed that the humans were not cowering in fear. His yellow eyes narrowed. Perhaps you do not understand the situation. I will make it clear. He reached into his cape and pulled out a long scroll. The paper looked old and important, covered with alien writing in gold ink. Behold, the scroll of inevitable doom. This document contains the terms of your surrender. He began to read in a very serious voice. Article 1. All humans will immediately cease any resistance to the Empire. Article 2. Earth will provide tribute in the form of resources, technology, and workers. Article 3. All human governments will dissolve and accept imperial rule. Article 4. Humans who resist will face the terrible punishment of eternal servitude. Sarah looked at her team. Dr. Peterson had his hand over his mouth. Colonel Rodriguez was turning red from holding in laughter. The other diplomats were staring at their feet, trying to stay serious. The whole situation was just too ridiculous. Here was this alien commander sitting on a massive throne, reading from a scroll called The Scroll of Inevitable Doom, and threatening them with eternal servitude. It sounded like dialogue from a cartoon villain. When Admiral Zephyrian finished reading Article 17, about the crushing of human spirits, Dr. Peterson finally broke. A small giggle escaped from behind his hand. The sound echoed in the quiet chamber. Admiral Zephyrian stopped reading and stared at him. Did you just laugh? Dr. Peterson tried to compose himself. Sorry, it's just eternal servitude? Really? Who writes this stuff? That did it. Sarah started chuckling. Then Colonel Rodriguez joined in. Soon all 6 humans were laughing while hundreds of confused aliens watched. Admiral Zephyrian had conquered 847 different species across the galaxy. He had seen fear, anger, desperation, and hopelessness. He had never seen laughter. Silence. He roared. You dare mock the Empire? We're not mocking you, Sarah said, wiping tears from her eyes. It's just, this is exactly what we thought would happen. We've been imagining this scenario for decades. This is like our favorite movie plot. The alien commander looked around at his soldiers and advisors. They all looked just as confused as he felt. In 10,000 years of galactic conquest, this had never happened before. Admiral Zephyrian spent the next 2 days trying to understand what had gone wrong. He called emergency meetings with his top officers. They studied videos of the encounter over and over. They read reports from their intelligence division about human psychology. Nothing made sense. Perhaps they are insane, suggested Commander Vexcala, his second in command. Some species develop mental illness when faced with superior technology. Or maybe they don't understand what we're offering them, said Intelligence Officer Morthic. They might think this is some kind of game. Admiral Zephyrian decided to try a different approach. He would show these humans exactly what the Empire could do. Fear was a universal language. Every species understood power when they saw it. He sent another message to Earth, inviting the human delegation back to his ship. This time, he would demonstrate the might of the Empire in ways they could not ignore. Sarah and her team arrived the next morning. The Admiral had prepared a special presentation in a different chamber. This room was smaller, but filled with advanced holographic equipment. Screens covered every wall, showing images of planets and star systems. Humans, Admiral Zephyrian began, his voice serious and commanding. You did not seem to appreciate the generosity of our offer yesterday. Perhaps you need to see what happens to species who refuse to join the Empire willingly. He gestured to the screens. Images appeared showing massive space battles. Human-shaped aliens ran in terror as Imperial ships bombarded their cities. Buildings exploded in slow motion. The scenes were designed to be terrifying. Dr. Peterson leaned forward, studying the images with interest. "The special effects are pretty good," he whispered to Sarah, "though the explosions look a bit fake. Too much orange fire, not enough debris." "You destroyed an entire civilization," Admiral Zephyrian said dramatically, pointing at one screen that showed a planet covered in smoke and ruins. Colonel Rodriguez nodded seriously. "That's tragic. But can I ask why you kept the cameras so steady during the bombardment?" "Real combat footage usually has more shaky cam, and the lighting is very even for a disaster scene." The Admiral's four eyes blinked in confusion. "Lighting? Yeah, usually when buildings explode, you get uneven light sources," Colonel Rodriguez continued. "This looks more like a movie set. Very professional work, though." Admiral Zephyrian moved to the next demonstration. A huge hologram appeared in the center of the room showing an Imperial war machine. It was a massive robot, over 300 feet tall, with weapons for arms and rockets on its back. "This is a destroyer mech," the Admiral announced. "One of these machines can level an entire city in minutes. We have 10,000 of them." Sarah studied the hologram carefully. "That's actually pretty cool. But doesn't it fall over? The center of gravity looks way off. The legs are too skinny for something that size," added Dr. Peterson. "And where does it store ammunition for all those weapons? There's no room for power systems either. It doesn't fall over." Admiral Zephyrian snapped. "It's a perfect war machine." "I'm not saying it's not impressive," Sarah said politely. "It's just that we've seen this design before, in movies and TV shows. Usually, the robot falls over when someone attacks the knee joints." The Admiral brought up more images. Ships that could destroy stars. Weapons that could crack planets in half. Armies of millions of soldiers marching across alien worlds. Each image was more dramatic than the last, but the humans treated each one like they were critiquing a movie. They commented on the cinematography, questioned the physics, and compared everything to films they had seen. When the Admiral showed them a weapon that could boil entire oceans, Colonel Rodriguez mentioned that Hollywood had done something similar in a movie from 1987, but with better water effects. Finally, Admiral Zephyrian tried his most powerful demonstration. He activated a device that projected realistic holograms directly into their brains. The humans suddenly found themselves standing on a battlefield, watching Imperial forces destroy everything around them. They could smell smoke, hear screams, and feel the heat from explosions. It was completely realistic. Every detail was perfect. The Admiral had used this device on hundreds of species, and it had never failed to break their will to resist. Sarah looked around at the chaos and destruction. Then she started laughing again. "Oh my God," she said, grinning. "This is like the best virtual reality game ever. How are you doing this? The haptic feedback is amazing." Dr. Peterson was examining a holographic explosion with scientific curiosity. "The particle effects are incredible. How do you generate this much detail in real time? This is not a game." Admiral Zephyrian roared. "This is real. This is what will happen to your world." "But it's not real," Colonel Rodriguez pointed out. "It's a hologram. A very good one, but still just a projection. Are you trying to scare us with special effects?" The Admiral ended the demonstration abruptly. The battlefield disappeared, leaving them back in the chamber. He was breathing heavily, and his blue skin had turned slightly purple, which his officers knew meant he was very angry. "Why don't you fear us?" he demanded. "Every species fears the Empire. We are the most powerful force in the galaxy." Sarah thought about how to explain it. "It's not that we don't believe you're powerful. It's just, we've been imagining exactly this scenario for almost a century. Hostile aliens showing up with big ships and demanding surrender. We write stories about it, make movies about it, play games about it." She pulled out her phone and showed him a movie trailer. Look, this is from a film made 20 years ago. Aliens invade Earth with massive ships and threaten humanity. In our story, we always win. Admiral Zephyrian watched the trailer with growing horror. The human movie ships looked almost exactly like his own fleet. The alien invaders used similar weapons and tactics. Worst of all, in the movie, the humans defeated the aliens using cleverness and determination. You make entertainment about our invasion techniques? He asked weakly. Oh yeah, it's a whole genre, Dr. Peterson said enthusiastically. We call them invasion movies. There are hundreds of them. Independence Day, War of the Worlds, Pacific Rim, Mars Attacks, Battle Los Angeles. Mars Attacks is my favorite, Colonel Rodriguez added. The aliens are so over-the-top evil that it becomes funny. Admiral Zephyrian felt something he had never experienced before. For the first time in his military career, he was genuinely confused. These humans had somehow turned the Empire's greatest strengths into entertainment. They had imagined being conquered so many times that the real things seemed familiar and unthreatening. He dismissed the human delegation and returned to his quarters. That night, he sent an encrypted message to Imperial Command requesting backup. He wasn't sure what kind of backup he needed. But whatever was happening on Earth was beyond his experience. The humans, meanwhile, went back to their space station and started making phone calls to Earth. Soon, news stations around the world were broadcasting footage of the alien demonstrations and interviewing movie directors about how realistic the special effects were. The Empire had finally met a species that refused to be impressed. 3 days later, the Imperial ship Endless Suffering arrived from the core worlds. Admiral Zephyrian watched it dock with a mixture of relief and nervousness. The ship carried Mindrendera Clicksmoth, the Empire's most feared psychological warfare specialist. Clicksmoth was not like other Imperial officers. Where they relied on physical intimidation, he attacked the mind itself. His species, the Vorthic, had natural psychic abilities that could project fear, despair, and madness directly into their victims' thoughts. He had broken the will of entire civilizations without firing a single shot. When Clicksmoth materialized on the bridge, even Admiral Zephyrian felt a chill. The Mindrendera was thin and pale, with large black eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. His presence made the air feel cold and heavy. Admiral, Clicksmoth's voice whispered through everyone's minds rather than their ears. I understand you are having difficulties with the local species. They refuse to be intimidated, Admiral Zephyrian admitted. Our standard methods have proven ineffective. Clicksmoth's lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Every mind has fears buried within it. Every species has nightmares that can be awakened. I will find theirs. The next day, the human delegation arrived for another meeting. Admiral Zephyrian had told them that the Empire wanted to discuss terms for Earth's integration into their civilization. Sarah suspected this was another attempt to scare them, but she came anyway. Diplomacy required showing up even when the other side was being ridiculous. This time, they were brought to a different chamber entirely. It was perfectly round with no windows or decorations. The walls were smooth black metal that seemed to absorb light. In the center of the room stood Clicksmoth, waiting. Welcome, humans, his voice echoed inside their heads. I am Mindrendera Clicksmoth. I specialize in revealing truth through terror. Dr. Peterson looked around the room with interest. Sensory deprivation chamber? That's clever. Cut off external input to make people focus on internal psychological pressure. Clicksmoth ignored the comment and raised his long, thin arms. Prepare to see your deepest fears made manifest. The room suddenly changed. The humans found themselves standing in what looked like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The sky was red, and filled with smoke. Buildings lay in ruins everywhere. Bodies littered the streets. Monsters with too many teeth and not enough skin crawled through the wreckage, hunting for survivors. It was a vision of Earth after the Empire had destroyed it. Every detail was perfectly crafted to inspire horror and despair. The smell of death filled the air. Screams echoed from the distance. The monsters turned toward the humans with hungry eyes. Sarah looked around at the nightmare landscape and nodded approvingly. The production value is even better than yesterday. How many people worked on designing this? The lighting is much more realistic, Colonel Rodriguez agreed. Better use of shadows and environmental storytelling. Dr. Peterson was studying one of the monsters with professional curiosity. The creature design is solid. Good mix of familiar and alien elements. Though the proportions are a bit off, those legs couldn't support that body mass in normal gravity. Clicksmoth was stunned. The vision he was projecting showed humanity's complete destruction. These people should be screaming, begging, breaking down mentally. Instead, they were giving him feedback like he was a student film project. He tried a different approach. The wasteland disappeared, replaced by a more personal horror. Now each human saw their own worst fears. Sarah saw herself failing as a diplomat, starting a war that killed millions. Colonel Rodriguez saw his soldiers dying because of his bad decisions. Dr. Peterson saw alien diseases, destroying all life on Earth. But even these personal terrors didn't work as expected. Oh, imposter syndrome nightmares, Sarah said, recognizing the nature of her vision. Classic anxiety manifestation. Are you reading this from my subconscious, or is it just a good guess? Military guilt complex. Colonel Rodriguez noted about his own vision. Pretty standard stuff. Every officer worries about getting people killed. You might want to add more specific details to make it feel more personal. Dr. Peterson was actually taking notes about his vision. Fascinating how you're triggering specific fear responses. Is this telepathic manipulation or some kind of drug in the air? Clicksmoth tried again and again. He showed them alien parasites taking over their bodies. They compared it to movies they'd seen. He showed them Earth being consumed by cosmic horrors. They discussed the special effects techniques. He showed them humanity enslaved and tortured for eternity. They critiqued the costume design. Finally, exhausted and confused, Clicksmoth ended the session. The humans found themselves back in the plain black chamber. The Mendrenderer was breathing heavily, something his species rarely needed to do. Why? Why does nothing frighten you? He whispered. Oh, we're definitely frightened, Sarah assured him. Just not of you. We're scared of climate change, nuclear war, economic collapse, social media, student loans. You know, real stuff. Your horror scenarios are pretty tame compared to our news, Colonel Rodriguez added. At least your monsters are honest about wanting to eat us. While the Empire struggled with humanity's strange reactions, something else was happening across the galaxy. Human internet culture was spreading. It started when Dr. Peterson uploaded a video to social media showing highlights from their meetings with the Empire. He added captions and commentary, turning the Admiral's dramatic threats into comedy. The video went viral on Earth within hours, but human internet signals were strong, and some alien civilizations picked them up. Species that had been conquered by the Empire decades or centuries ago started seeing these transmissions. They watched humans laughing at the same threats, the same demonstrations, the same psychological techniques that had broken their own will to resist. On the planet Zephyria, a young alien named Kixtel showed the human videos to her friends. The Zephyrians had been Imperial subjects for 200 years. They remembered when Admiral Zephyrian's grandfather had arrived with the same speech. The same dramatic music, the same scroll. Wait, Kixtel said. watching Sarah Chun laugh at the scroll of inevitable doom. Why did we think that was scary? It's just a piece of paper with fancy writing. On the mining world of Torgoth, workers shared human memes about imperial bureaucracy. Someone had photoshopped Admiral Zephyrian's face onto an image with the caption, "When you have to work on Saturday and your manager sends another motivational email." The image spread through the galactic communication network faster than imperial sensors could stop it. Soon, variations appeared. Imperial Decree No. 47. All subjects must look intimidated during official ceremonies. Breaking. Local emperor discovers other species don't automatically worship him. The Empire's own military started seeing the memes. Young officers began questioning why their training involved so much dramatic posing and theatrical voice projection. Older officers found themselves humming the auto-tuned remix of Admiral Zephyrian's threats that had somehow made it into their music feeds. Back on his flagship, Admiral Zephyrian was having the worst week of his military career. His subordinates were acting strange. The conquered species in nearby systems were becoming rebellious. Worst of all, he couldn't get that ridiculous human music out of his head. He called another meeting with the human delegation, hoping to salvage the situation somehow. "What do you want?" he asked them bluntly. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Honestly, we just want to be left alone to do our own thing. But if you're interested in trade, cultural exchange, maybe sharing some of that cool technology, we're open to talking. You would negotiate with us as equals?" Admiral Zephyrian was shocked. "Well, yeah," Colonel Rodriguez said. "That's how diplomacy works. Both sides get something they want." The concept was so alien to the Admiral that he almost couldn't process it. The Empire didn't negotiate. They conquered. They demanded. They took what they wanted and crushed resistance. But maybe, he thought as he watched these strange humans treat him like a normal person instead of a terrifying conqueror, there was another way. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning, Imperial Standard Time. Admiral Zephyrian was reviewing daily reports when his communications officer, Sub-Commander Valtara, approached his command throne with obvious nervousness. "Sir, we're receiving complaints from systems across the third sector. Governors are reporting unusual behavior among their subject populations." Admiral Zephyrian looked up from his reports about human negotiations. "What kind of unusual behavior?" Valtara activated the main screen. Images appeared showing crowds of aliens in various Imperial territories. But instead of the usual fearful obedience, these crowds were laughing. They held signs with strange human symbols on them. Some were singing. The Zephyrian population centers are experiencing what they call peaceful mockery demonstrations, Valtara explained. They're recreating your first meeting with the humans, but treating it as entertainment. On the screen, Admiral Zephyrian watched a Zephyrian actor wearing fake armor and a cardboard crown, dramatically reading from a scroll, while other aliens laughed and threw paper airplanes at him. "They're making fun of the scroll of inevitable doom," Valtara continued. "It's become some kind of comedy performance." The Admiral's 4 hands clenched into fists. What else? More images appeared. On the mining world of Torgoth, workers had organized what they called a dramatic threat competition. Imperial guards stood by, helplessly, as miners took turns giving overly serious speeches about crushing the resistance and eternal servitude, while others judged their performances for entertainment value. On Kepler 442b, the local population had started selling T-shirts with Admiral Zephyrian's face on them, along with captions like, "I came here to conquer planets and look intimidating, and I'm all out of planets." "Sir," Valtara said quietly, "there's more." She showed him footage from the Imperial Academy on the capital world. Young officer cadets were supposed to be practicing their intimidation techniques. Instead, they were watching human videos and comparing their own dramatic gestures to what the humans called Saturday morning cartoon villain behavior. The instructor tried to restore order, Valtara explained. But when he started his speech about striking fear into enemy hearts, the entire class began laughing. Admiral Zephyrian watched his future officers giggling at the training that was supposed to prepare them for galactic conquest. One cadet was showing others how to make their voice sound more dramatically evil by imitating human movie villains, but the worst was yet to come. "Sir, there's been an incident with your speech from last week. The one where you threatened to rain fire upon the insolent humans." Admiral Zephyrian remembered that speech. He had been particularly proud of it. The dramatic pauses, the threatening gestures, the way his voice echoed through the chamber. It was supposed to be the final warning before the Empire resorted to force. What kind of incident? Valtara looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Someone recorded it and modified it. With music. She played the file. Admiral Zephyrian's own voice filled the chamber, but it had been changed. His dramatic threats were now set to a catchy electronic beat. His pauses had been timed to match the rhythm. His most intimidating lines had been auto-tuned into a melody. "I will rain fire," his modified voice sang, "upon the insolent humans. They will know. They will know. The power of the Empire." It was catchy. Embarrassingly, horribly catchy. Admiral Zephyrian realized that he was unconsciously tapping one foot to the beat. "How widely has this been distributed?" he asked. "Sir, it's currently the #1 song on Galactic Spotify. It has over 50 million plays in the last 24 hours. Admiral Zephyrian closed his eyes. Somewhere in the galaxy, 50 million beings were listening to his most serious threats being played as dance music. The Zephyrian youth have started using it as a TikTok trend, Valtara continued. They record themselves lip-syncing to your threats while doing silly dances. Show me. The screen filled with dozens of videos. Young Zephyrians, Togothians, Keplerian, and other species were all dancing to his auto-tuned threats. Some were in Imperial uniforms, mocking the dramatic poses they'd been taught to fear. Others were dressed as humans, pretending to laugh at his warnings. One video showed an entire Zephyrian high school class performing a choreographed dance routine to "I Will Rain Fire." The teacher was clapping along. "Sir, the local governors are requesting guidance. They don't know how to respond when their populations are treating imperial authority as a source of entertainment." Admiral Zephyrian stood up from his throne and walked to the viewing window. Outside, his massive fleet still looked intimidating. The weapons were still functional. The ships could still destroy planets. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter anymore. A message appeared on his personal communication device. It was from his own sister, Zephyria, who worked as a teacher on the capital world. "Little brother," the message read, "I heard your song on the radio today. Very catchy. The children in my class have been singing it all morning. They wanted me to ask if you could make more music like this. Also, they drew you some pictures." Attached were crude drawings made by Imperial children. They showed Admiral Zephyrian with a big smile, holding a microphone instead of a weapon. One drawing had him surrounded by happy aliens and humans, all dancing together. The Admiral sat back down heavily. Somehow, in the span of 2 weeks, the Empire's most basic tool, fear, had been completely neutralized. Not through military force or superior technology, but through something much more dangerous. The simple refusal to take them seriously. His communications board lit up with more reports. The governor of Proxima 7 was requesting military support because his population had declared a silly hat day in honor of imperial crown designs. The mining guild of Tau Ceti was on strike, demanding that their overseers stop trying to be scary and just be professional managers. The Imperial Honor Guard was facing a recruitment crisis because young aliens thought their ceremonial war dance looked super cringe. Most concerning of all, reports were coming in from the frontier worlds. Species that the Empire hadn't even contacted, yet were somehow getting human broadcasts. They were learning about human reactions to Imperial conquest techniques before the Empire even arrived. The Arcturus system had sent a formal message declining Imperial conquest. "Thank you for your interest in our world," the message read. "But after reviewing available documentation of your standard procedures, we must respectfully pass. Perhaps you could consider a less dramatic approach to interstellar relations?" Admiral Zephyrian realized that the Empire was facing something unprecedented. For the first time in 10,000 years, they were being rejected not through force, but through mockery. His personal communicator chimed again. This time, it was a message from Emperor Vexthalen himself. "Admiral, reports of the human situation have reached the capital. I am coming personally to assess this threat to Imperial authority. Do not take any action until I arrive." Admiral Zephyrian looked at the message and felt a new emotion: sympathy. The Emperor had no idea what he was walking into. Outside his window, the human space station was visible in the distance. Through his enhanced vision, he could see humans going about their daily activities. They were laughing, talking, working. They looked completely unbothered by the massive Imperial fleet surrounding their world. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zephyrian wondered if being feared was actually worth it. Emperor Vexthalen's arrival was meant to be the most impressive display of power in Imperial history. His personal ship, the Eternal Majesty, was 3 times larger than Admiral Zephyrian's flagship. It was pure black metal shaped like a massive crown, with energy weapons that could be seen from the surface of nearby planets. The Emperor himself was the culmination of 10,000 years of selective breeding for intimidation. He stood 12 feet tall with skin so dark blue it was almost black. His 6 arms were each cybernetically enhanced with built-in weapons. His crown was made from the crystallized fears of conquered worlds. Or so the legends claimed. When the Eternal Majesty arrived in Earth's solar system, every screen across the galaxy carried the broadcast. This was how the Empire handled serious threats to their authority. This was how they reminded the universe who was in charge. Emperor Vexthalen's message to Earth was simple: send your representatives to the Galactic Senate immediately. The Empire will demonstrate why resistance is futile. Sarah Chen received the summons while she was having breakfast with her team on the human space station. They had been expecting something like this for days. "Wow," she said, reading the message. "Looks like we get to meet the big boss. Should we be worried?" asked Dr. Peterson. Colonel Rodriguez looked out at the massive Imperial fleet that now surrounded Earth. Probably. But honestly, at this point, what's the worst that could happen? They auto-tune another speech. The journey to the Galactic Senate took 3 days through Imperial hyperspace. Sarah and her team found themselves aboard a transport ship with delegations from dozens of other species, all heading to the capital world for an emergency session. Many of these delegates were from worlds that had been conquered by the Empire. They whispered to each other nervously, stealing glances at the humans who had somehow survived direct Imperial contact without surrendering. On the second day, a delegation from Zephyria approached Sarah during dinner. Their leader, Ambassador Kixtel, looked nervous but determined. "We wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For showing us that they're not gods. My people have been afraid for 200 years. But when we saw your videos, when we saw you laughing at the same threats that terrified our grandparents, it changed everything. More delegations joined the conversation. The Togothians talked about how human memes had spread through their Mayan communities. The Keplerians described how their youth had stopped fearing imperial ceremonies after seeing humans treat them as entertainment. "You broke something," explained Ambassador Mortuck of the Taotians. "Something that held us all in mental chains. Fear was their greatest weapon, and you made it powerless." When they reached the capital world, Sarah was amazed by what she saw. The entire planet was a single massive city, built to intimidate visitors. Every building was sharp and angular. The sky was artificially darkened to create a sense of gloom. Even the plants were genetically modified to look threatening. But something was wrong with the usual atmosphere. Groups of young aliens were gathered in public squares, sharing human videos on their devices. Street musicians were playing auto-tuned versions of imperial speeches. Food vendors were selling scroll of inevitable doom sandwiches. The Galactic Senate building was enormous, designed to make individual delegates feel small and powerless. It had worked for 10,000 years. But as Sarah and her team entered the main chamber, she noticed that many of the other delegates no longer looked intimidated. They looked curious, even hopeful. Emperor Vex Thalen sat on a throne so large it could be seen from orbit. When he spoke, his voice was amplified to shake the entire building. The traditional opening ceremony included displays of imperial might, testimonials from conquered worlds, and a demonstration of planet-destroying weapons. Sarah watched it all with the same polite interest she might show for a local theater production. When the Emperor finally called her forward to address the Senate, she walked calmly to the center of the chamber. "You stand accused of corrupting the natural order of the galaxy," Emperor Vex Thalen announced. "Your species has somehow convinced others to reject the rightful authority of the Empire. How do you answer these charges?" Sarah looked up at the massive throne, then around at the thousands of delegates watching from the circular galleries. She took a deep breath. "Your Majesty, with respect, I think you're asking the wrong question. The issue isn't how we corrupted anything. The issue is how you forgot what leadership actually means." The chamber fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the Emperor like this. Sarah continued. "You spent 10,000 years making yourselves scary, but you forgot to make yourselves necessary. You focused so much on being feared that you never bothered to be helpful or trustworthy or even just nice." She gestured to the other delegates. "Look around this room. These are representatives of hundreds of worlds, thousands of species, billions of intelligent beings. And until 2 weeks ago, they were all afraid of you. But we're not laughing at your power. We're laughing because you think power is all that matters." Emperor Vex Thalen leaned forward on his throne. "Power is what matters. Power is what built this empire. Power is what keeps the galaxy in order." "But what kind of order?" Sarah asked. "You've created a galaxy where everyone is too scared to innovate, too frightened to explore, too afraid to reach their full potential. You've been so busy being the biggest fish that you forgot there might be better things to do than swimming in circles." She pulled out her tablet and activated a holographic display. Images appeared showing human technology, art, music, and exploration. "This is what we've accomplished in just a few thousand years since we developed civilization. Not through conquest, but through cooperation. We argue with each other constantly. We make mistakes. We fail at things. But we keep trying new ideas because no one is threatening us with eternal servitude if we think outside the box." The images shifted to show potential human-alien collaborations. Space stations where different species work together. Art that combined human creativity with alien perspectives. Scientific discoveries that could only come from multiple worlds sharing knowledge. "We could build something amazing together," Sarah said. "All of us. But only if we treat each other as partners instead of as rulers and subjects." Emperor Vex Thalen was quiet for a long time. Around the chamber, delegates whispered among themselves. Many were species that hadn't spoken freely in centuries, but the presence of humans seemed to give them courage. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "And what would you have us do? Abandon 10,000 years of imperial tradition? Start small," Sarah suggested. "Try talking to your subjects instead of threatening them. Try asking what they need instead of demanding what you want. Try being the kind of leader people choose to follow instead of the kind they're forced to obey." She paused, then smiled. "And maybe consider that being laughed with is better than being feared." Over the following months, the galaxy slowly began to change. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always smooth. But species that had been subjects for millennia started negotiating for better treatment. The Empire, faced with the choice between constant rebellion and actual cooperation, gradually chose cooperation. Admiral Zephyrian found himself working closely with human diplomats to establish the new relationship. It was awkward at first. He had spent his entire career learning to be intimidating, and now he had to learn to be collaborative. The breakthrough came during a dinner party at the human embassy on the capital world. Admiral Zephyrian had been invited to a small informal gathering with Sarah and her team. No thrones, no dramatic lighting, no ceremonial music. Just people sitting around a table sharing food and conversation. "I have a confession," the Admiral said halfway through the meal. "I've been practicing human humor." Everyone looked at him with interest. "I learned what humans call a knock-knock joke," he said nervously. "Let's hear it." Sarah encouraged. Admiral Zephyrian cleared his throat. "Knock knock. Who's there?" The humans replied in unison. "Zephyrian." "Zephyrian who?" The Admiral paused, clearly nervous about the punchline. "Zephyrian. To be a better leader?" There was a moment of silence. Then Colonel Rodriguez started chuckling. "That's terrible," he said. "I love it." Dr. Peterson was grinning. "The wordplay needs work, but the effort is definitely there. You'll get better with practice," Sarah assured him. "Humor is like diplomacy. It's all about timing and knowing your audience." Admiral Zephyrian smiled, a real smile, not the intimidating grimace he'd been taught. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was having a normal conversation with equals instead of commanding subordinates. As the evening went on, he found himself laughing at human jokes, sharing stories about his childhood on the Imperial home world, and asking questions about Earth culture. The transformation was remarkable, from galactic conqueror to dinner party guest. Later, as the party wound down, Sarah walked with him to the embassy balcony. Below them, the capital city stretched to the horizon. But instead of the usual gloomy atmosphere, there were lights and sounds of celebration. Young beings from dozens of species were gathering in the streets, sharing music and food and ideas. "This is better," Admiral Zephyrian admitted. "Being laughed with instead of feared."